Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, along with Tallulah and Gilbert. We, of course, are here for Robservations, chat number 163. Robservations is, of course, the show about something. And you are imagination connoisseurs and members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. It is July 5th. This is the 163rd show of Robservations. Crazy. Brought to you by, as always, Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, when you check out and you punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, you get 20% off your order. So today, I have to say, I just want to throw out some love. No controversial subjects, although I'm sure we'll get into that, because I got a letter from somebody that a longtime member of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, part of our international audience, all the way from Malaysia. You've heard from him recently, but he sent in a letter to the Burnettwork.net. If you want to send me a letter, please go. A lot of them coming in. It's amazing. But so Cal Kamel from Malaysia wrote me another letter. Now, first of all, I gotta give Cal some mad love, mad props here. So Cal has a company called Swak Props. That's S''WAK Props. And he has an Etsy store. Now, Cal makes, this is the best thing ever. He makes, amongst other things, he makes prop replicas of books that have appeared in movies. Now, one of the things that delights me to no end is when fans do things that just their creativity blows me away. So what Cal has done, and he sells this in his Etsy store, but there's only one left, but it says it's in 7 people's carts, including mine. He makes a prop replica of the 9 Gates book that appears in Roman Polanski's film, The Ninth Gate, starring Johnny Depp and Frank Langella and Lena Olin. Now, for whatever reason, The Ninth Gate is a particularly, it's a huge favorite of mine. I love The Ninth Gate. I've probably seen it 20 times. I love Wojciech Kilar's score. Wojciech Kilar also scored Coppola's Dracula. I love The Ninth Gate. It's one of those movies that I just don't know why I have so much love for it. I love the actors. I love the characters they're playing. I love the locations. I love the whole plot line. Now, it might not have the most satisfying ending in the world, but that doesn't diminish my love of it. Well, so Cal actually, there's a book in the film that the plot hinges on, and actually multiple copies of this book. The 9 Kingdoms, I think it's the 9 Kingdoms or Gates of, I forget the whole title of the book, but the 9 Gates, they call it the 9 Gates in the movie. So Cal of Swak Props has made a perfect replica of this book, and you can buy it on his Etsy store. Now, he did not pay me to say this. I'm not, and somebody's probably going to now go buy the last one out from under me. I got to save some shekels up. I want this. It's a crazy thing to have made, so mad props to Cal for even making it. But it's amazing, and his work looks to be second to none. And I take such delight in the fact that he even made it. Like, somebody watched this movie, clearly has the same kind of love for it that I do, and said, you know what? I've got my own prop company, and I make prop books. So I'm gonna make a prop replica of the Night Gates from the Night Gate. That alone sold me. But clearly, knowing from Cal from his previous letter, he and I, again, we park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. And he sent me another letter, which just endears him to me even more. And that is of course, the topic of today's chat. I wanted to just, do something that was all about fun and games and mirth-filled fandom. Truly a subject for imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity, could just dive into with relish. And that is, of course, the 1987 James Bond film, The Living Daylights. Timothy Dalton's first foray as 007, one of his 2. His second was, of course, 1989's License to Kill, which celebrates its 30th anniversary this summer. It was the same summer, of course, as Tim Burton's Batman, and also as Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Sort of a mixed bag, the summer of '89, but hey. So to start with, I want to read Cal's letter, and because it put a smile on my face as much as his prop replica that he's made, which is just, you got to go check it out. Go to his Etsy store. Again, Swack Props, S''WAK Props. But don't buy the book. There's one left. I want it. What can I say? No, I shouldn't say that because I just don't have the cash to spend on that book right now. But if I did, I'd buy it today. Somebody should, because it's awesome. And I just love the fact that he made this. And he's in Malaysia, which is doubly cool. So anyway, this coming from Cal. Hi, Rob. I hope you're well. I'm prompted to write you after hearing Aaron Brown's letter regarding his concerns for the future of the Bond franchise. And while I agree with most of his points, I have to disagree with him when he said that The Living Daylights is one of the poorest stories of the franchise and that Dalton took on the role of Bond at one of the worst times in the franchise history. I'm paraphrasing. You see, The Living Daylights is my favorite Bond film, and I feel obligated to come to its defense whenever I hear anyone say it isn't very good. Let me just interject here. I love The Living Daylights. I love Dalton as Bond in The Living Daylights. There's not a whole lot about The Living Daylights that I don't like. I just want to say that off the bat. I was 14 when The Living Daylights came out. Before that, the only Bond film I saw was The Man with the Golden Gun, For Your Eyes Only, and A View to a Kill, all through the wonders of VHS. When Daylights debuted, I was old enough to go and watch it by myself in the cinema. I loved it so much, I watched it 5 times during its run. Funny story. Remember when you mentioned that many men aspire to be like Bond? I felt pretty much the same after watching Daylights. I would borrow my dad's blazer, couple it with a white shirt of my school uniform, and a snap-on bow tie I found at a dollar store, and bug my little sister to take pictures of me in that ensemble with a disposable Fujifilm camera, with that famous Bond pose, legs crossed with one hand raised holding a gun, although in my case, sans gun. I then got the pictures printed and looked at them with a sense of pride, even giving one of them to my pen pal in West Malaysia, a cute girl I had met at a national sports meet just a couple of months back. Suffice to say, I never heard back from her again after I sent that picture. Laugh out loud. Anywho, back to The Living Daylights. That movie had all the necessary ingredients of a great Bond movie. Let me break it down. 1. Spectacular pre-title sequence. In fact, I would argue it has one of the best in the series. I like how we're shown the first 2 00 agents as they land on the Gibraltar installation, and the second one looks a bit like Roger Moore. Then we get our first reveal of the new Bond as he watches his fellow agent fall to his death. What follows is a high-octane chase as Bond goes after the assassin, while John Barry's modernized Bond theme enhances the action. By the time he parachutes into the yacht and introduces himself to the smitten young lady, I was sold on Dalton as Bond. 2. The soundtrack. Yes, I'm aware not many are fond of a-ha's theme song, but it is undeniable that The Living Daylights was the 3rd most successful Bond song in England and one of the band's biggest hits, if not one of their favorites. I certainly loved it, but that score by John Barry is definitely one of his best and serves as an excellent coda to his musical contribution to the franchise. I wore out my cassette of the soundtrack from listening to it over and over that I had to get another. Tracks like The Ice Chase, Necros Attacks, Hercules Takes Off, and Mujahideen and Opium are all great to listen to, as are the accompanying songs by the Pretenders. Many a time back then, I would have had Where Has Everybody Gone blaring from the headphones of from my Walkman as I sneak up behind my friends a la Necros. Fun times. 3. The gadgets. The scenes at Q Branch with the late Desmond Llewellyn are great. Even to this day, I'm still on the lookout for the right vintage Phillips keyring finder from that movie. The man swallowing couch, the ghetto blaster, the song playing on it is Sacred Heart by Chris Blackwell. Spent years trying to find it. All awesome. And of course, this movie features my second favorite car in the Bond franchise, and that is the 1985 Aston Martin V8 Volante. Who can forget the scene when Bond activates the car's laser beam and slices the Czech police car in half, or when the heads-up display appears on the windscreen as Bond sheepishly says, I've had a few optional extras installed. I can tell you my anticipation for Bond 25 went up just because of the new picture with Daniel Craig standing in front of that car. Me too, son. Me too. 4. The Bond girl. Mariam Dabo is naturally stunning, and as Cara Malovi, she portrayed a sweet naivete, which is the perfect combination with Dalton's gentleman savior, making this one of the most appealing romances in the series. 5. The villains. While Joe Don Baker's Brad Whitaker was a bit over the top, the performances of both Jerome Crabbe as General Koskov and Andreas Winooski as the ice-cold Necros brilliantly act as a counterbalance. He appeared 2 years later, actually 1 year later, in Die Hard. I love the fact that while Koskov is constantly kissing everyone on the cheek and hugging them, underneath he is ruthless and would do anything to betray anyone for money and power. And despite being an obvious take on Red Grant from Russia with Love, Necros has to be one of the best henchmen in the series. His final showdown with Bond, flapping on the neck on the back of the Hercules, flapping on the net on the back of the Hercules is one of the most hair-raising stunts I've ever seen before the days of CGI. Agreed. It's pretty great. 6. The action. The opening chase in Gibraltar, the car chase with the Aston Martin, the rooftop sequence in Tangiers, the battle at a Soviet airbase, the fight on the plane, even the chase in the cello case, all make for memorable and thrilling action-packed sequences. But despite that, the film finds a nice balance between the story and action, making The Living Daylights one of the better-paced Bond movies. 7. The locations. Bond films have always been globe-trotting adventures, and there was plenty of that in this one. We start in Gibraltar, then move on to Bratislava, to Bladen House in the English countryside, Vienna, Tangiers, and we end spectacularly in Afghanistan. I thought the cinematography did a great job of depicting the distinctiveness of each location, especially the romanticism of Vienna and the sweeping vistas of the Afghan desert. Aside from these elements, the film's supporting cast is also pretty good. The always dependable John Rhys-Davies and Art Malik gave solid performances. Thomas Wheatley Saunders, head of Section 5 Vienna, is another highlight as the ultimate bureaucratic agent who at first cold towards Bond, but then chooses to help him, only to be killed as a lesson for him. But ultimately, it's Dalton's portrayal which made the film a success. Looks-wise, he perfectly fit Fleming's description of the character with his black hair, piercing blue eyes, not to mention being physically fit compared to Roger Moore in A View to a Kill. Most importantly, he's a very capable actor. The best example of this is the way he depicts Bond's rage when Saunders is killed midway through the film. No matter what one might think of Dalton as Bond, he is without question one of the finest and most faithful on-screen portrayals of the character. Absolutely agreed. All of these elements made The Living Daylights both a box office and critical success when it was released in the summer of 1987. And even now, after 3 decades, I think it holds up quite well, perhaps even better than some of the films that both preceded it and followed it. And while I enjoyed some aspects of the follow-up License to Kill, it never quite lived up to The Living Daylights. But that's a review for another letter. Sincerely yours, Cal, aka Swack Props. Well, I'll tell you, man, I agree with your assessment of Living Daylights 100%. I found A View to a Kill one of the most disappointing, if not the most disappointing entry in the Bond franchise, certainly up to that point in time. I actually wrote a review of A View to a Kill for my high school newspaper, and I gave it a bad review, which gave me no pleasure at all. I love the Bond franchise, and I really despised A View to a Kill. And for me, when I saw when I saw Living Daylights, I thought it was a huge return to form for the franchise. It was just wonderful. And while John Barry did do the score for while John Barry did do the score for A View to a Kill, which is a great score, it's probably one of the best elements of that film. I really liked sort of like the electronic drums that were added to the work he was doing for the score for The Living Daylights. I loved Barry's score, and like you, I had bought the CD, but I played that CD endlessly in my car, and all of the tracks that you cite were great. But it was that chase music that gets repeated often throughout that score that that I love that we first heard in Gibraltar. And I agree, man. The introduction of Timothy Dalton. It was interesting. I can't recall the actual reasons why, but Walter Gotell was supposed to come back as General Gogol. And the whole thing about Schmiert, Spion, and Death to Spies and all that. Somehow, I don't know if he was in the best of health or not. He, of course, wound up in the worst episode of The Next Generation's first season, Star Trek The Next Generation's first season. He showed up in Home Soil, of all things, but he couldn't show up in The Living Daylights. I was kind of bummed out by that. But John Rhys Davies acquitted himself admirably. I did like his general. It was pretty cool. It's just if it was Walter Gotell, he would have been a nice carryover from the series. I mean, one of the things about the Bond franchise, continuity is all over the place, but I did love when they would introduce a new Bond and they would carry over elements from older iterations of the franchise, like Bernard Hill as M, and then when they did that with Judi Dench. It would have been nice to see General Gogol come forward, and we could have seen him again. And of course, we then saw, Brad Whitaker. We saw him. Actually, we didn't see him, but we did see Jodan Baker come back, which I kind of liked. I thought that was pretty cool. I mean, I always love when they do that. But I loved License to Kill. It was why do I keep saying this? I loved Living Daylights. License to Kill was the next movie, which I did not like so much, to be honest. License to Kill is also one of my least favorite Bond films. I thought it started out well, but it was so bargain basement. The whole thing was shot in Mexico, and it just looks cheap. And it felt like it doesn't look cheap because it was shot in Mexico. It just looks cheap in general. And I thought that we were getting better stories of drug lords on Miami Vice and Wise Guy. So License to Kill was not exactly the best thing in the world to me. And it's unfortunate that after that, the Eon Productions and the Broccoli's and Michael Wilson, they found themselves embroiled in more of Kevin McClory's BS lawsuit shenanigans, and it stopped the Bond franchise from moving forward for 6 years, because I think Dalton would have had at least one or two more outings as Bond in him. And I think that's one of the great tragedies of the Bond franchise moving into the 90s. But it did give us GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies, which I definitely think are both highlights of the film series, even though Tomorrow Never Dies was heavily edited. The character of Stamper, who had his pain centers reversed, they didn't really get into that. A lot of the movie, I think a lot of Tomorrow Never Dies was edited out for time, but then they repeated that with one of the characters from The World Is Not Enough. But Living Daylights is a very fine example of the Bond franchise at its very best. And I love that you, Cal, wrote in to give us some love. I don't know how you guys feel about Living Daylights, but I definitely thought it was a return to greatness for the franchise, and certainly one of the best outings, if not the best outing in the 80s, although some people might say that was For Your Eyes Only. But I think an argument could be made that The Living Daylights was certainly up there. At least, I mean, to me, it was the quintessential 80s Bond film, and I dearly, dearly loved it. I don't know what you guys think about that, but I certainly do. And I think it's great to start out this chat with something that, maybe not so political. We're back to just celebrating imagination connoisseur love for one of my favorite franchises, the James Bond franchise. So I want to thank you for that letter. And I also want to thank you for making a prop replica of the Nine Gates from Roman Polanski's The Ninth Gate, which I can't believe that you've done, and you've done it in such high style, sir. I don't normally collect prop replicas, but that's something I just want to own, because I want people, when I'm dead, to puzzle over this. They're going to look at this and go, what is this? What is this book? I want to actually, I'll probably, I want one. So save one for me. I want the Lucifer version. I want it all, the all-encompassing version. But who wouldn't want that? If you've seen The Ninth Gate and you love The Ninth Gate, you're going to want one of Swack Props' copies, because it's pretty astonishing, and I love that you've made it. Let's see. The Doctor 1701A is here and says, The Living Daylights is best. Dalton was an assassin and caring. I agree with that, sir. I agree with that, the Doctor. I think you're right. I mean, you think he's going to kill Cara Mallovi at the beginning, but clearly he sees that she's not an assassin. And it just, once again, it established Bond. It was really interesting. There was a lot of op-ed pieces at the time because AIDS had turned into a full-blown epidemic at that point. And a lot of pundits were citing the fact that The Living Daylights was pulling back on Bond bedding multiple women throughout the films. And it was seen as a response to that. And I was like, I didn't see that as a subtext. I mean, maybe it was there. I didn't see it though as a subtext of the film. I just felt that, Bond also loves the finer things in life. And I think when he first saw Cara Malovi, it made sense to me that she was a cellist. She played classical music. She was very good at it. And I think he was taken by her purity and by her truthfulness and by her beauty. And so maybe it was a way of taming that Bond wasn't such a relentless womanizer in The Living Daylights and stuck to one woman in the film. But I always thought, even when I watched it in '87, that he found a woman of such caliber, such quality, that he truly cared about her, especially when he saw that she'd clearly been manipulated into, duped by Koskov to do this stupid thing. And I think he really went into protector mode and wanted to make sure. And as the more he spent time with her, he genuinely fell in love with her, which I liked. I thought that was a great part of the franchise because, like you, she was beautiful, she was talented, and she felt worthy of Bond's love, even though she wasn't a fellow spy or some badass. She was just a genuine, honest person that I think he was attracted to her purity. And I love that. I thought that was great. I didn't find it to be offensive, or it didn't diminish my enjoyment of the film at all. And I thought she was actually one of the top tier Bond women in the franchise. So yeah. This next letter comes from Catalan Kit, who wrote me before recently from Romania. So we jump from Malaysia across the planet to Romania. So take it away, Catalan. Hi there, Mr. Burnett. This letter's on the positive side, or I hope I can keep it that way. I'm a very dedicated person when it comes to things I love or admire. I know the last time I came out like an ass, splitting left and right, but just like you guys there, far away from Romania, I love, respect, and admire movies that have the capability to move me in any direction. Watching your older live chats brings up so much information about lots of interesting things and lots of movie titles that could be nice to watch. So I did. Not much for a horror guy, but everybody is expendable for the good of the film. Well, that was hilarious for a horror movie. But I kind of enjoyed watching your Hills Run Red. As I said, not much of a horror movie fan. I also watched and enjoyed this time The Final Countdown. Funky for the 80s. Both came out of your streams, and I hope you can recommend more movies. Yeah, I'm picky when it comes to movies, but sometimes shit just happens, like Dollhouse, a very cheesy series that goes back and forward like a drunk guy at the bar asking for another beer. Not so original an idea, you might say, but the first closest to reality, I say. Yeah, the paradox is in. I do like realism in my sci-fi movies. Imagine you can program a human being as a clandestine operation for what you do exactly. For the oldest job on this planet, sex dolls. It comes natural. The rest of the movies go with military. Actually, this movie goes to weaponize the characters as well, but hey, nobody's perfect. What are your thoughts on this series, Mr. Burnett? Well, I liked Dollhouse. I loved Eliza Dushku. But like you, I thought it was really hit and miss, and it delved into themes that we had seen before, but I would have liked to see it continue, to see where they took it, to be honest. On the other hand, here's another series that blew me away. Lie to Me. For some, this is kind of sci-fi, probably because of the controversy. Can we really interpret micro expressions? And that's real science. Tim Roth is playing this role like the last one ever. I love this guy. Brilliant series, in my opinion, that ended so abruptly and didn't answer a lot of questions. Were they explaining too much? Did someone pull the plug on this series because of that? Mr. Burnett, any insights into this series or for the reason it ended so abruptly? You know what? To be honest, I love Tim Roth. I've never watched an episode of Lie to Me, so I can't speak to that. P.S. Watching your episode number 133, you were talking about a big gathering in London with Mr. Jim. Well, I'm from Europe, and it would be an honor to meet you and other fellow geeks and members of the Imagination Connoisseur and Post-Geek Singularity community for a pint of beer and lots of rambling. Would you be nice to give me more info about this? More prices, dates, and locations to make it more like a plan than an idea? Thanks always. Best regards from Romania to you and the Post-Geek Singularity. Okay, here's the thing. So as we all know, next year, Bond 25 opens. And in 2012, I went with a few friends to see Skyfall in London at the Odeon Cinema in Leicester Square. Now, the Odeon Cinema in Leicester Square has hosted many, many, many premieres. It has a very storied history, and that's the reason I wanted to go see Skyfall. Was it was the 50th anniversary Bond film, opened in 2012, 50th anniversary since Dr. No opened. And I didn't want to go see Bond here with just a bunch of, press, because I always want, since Octopussy, I went to Bond press screenings. I wanted to go with real fanatics. Plus, it's just a fun thing to think up and do, to save up some money, go to London, see a James Bond movie on opening day with the true British fans, the audience. And it was great. I loved it. I had such a fun time. Totally impractical. I understand. It's patently ridiculous, but I did have friends come and meet us from Norway, and it was a fun time, and I had a really fun weekend just hanging out in London with my friends Charlie and my friend Emma and Terj from Norway and his girlfriend. I mean, it was great. We had a good time. So basically, Bond 25 is the 25th official James Bond movie. It supposedly opens on April 3rd, which would mean that is the day. I can't go to the Prince's Trust or whatever, the royal premiere of Bond 25. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in going to London. Elizabeth and I are going to go to London. We're going to go see the first show of Bond 25 at the Odeon Theater in Leicester Square. That's where we're going to go. Or unless, they do have IMAX shows, but I kind of like going to the Odeon Cinema in Leicester Square just because it's Leicester Square. But, so I can be convinced to go to an IMAX screen instead. But anyway, I think it'd be cool to sort of have, I always talk about hitting the road and doing Robservation Nation and just driving from city to city. I wanted to do that if I was able to get the rights to Free Enterprise and then do a 4K restoration. I'd do a new cut, the Final Frontier cut of Free Enterprise, and then I would drive around the country and show it, kind of like what Kevin Smith did. That would be one thing. But this would be a meetup. And basically, obviously, I have no way of paying for everybody. I can't do that. If I was rich, I would, but I can't. So everybody would have to pay their own way, obviously. But it would be just fun to meet up and sort of hang out and check out the sights in London. And I've stayed at the St. Martin's Lane Hotel a number of times when I've gone to London. I'm a big fan of it. It's within walking distance of the theater. But it's great. And it's also by Trafalgar Square. It's nice, central located London hotel. It's very cool. So that's what I want to do. Wouldn't it be cool to just, this could be a big group, a truly international group. So, Catalan, if you're interested, we'll put it together. If you guys are into it, we're going to make this happen. I want to make it happen. I think it'd be fun. Got to start saving the shekels, maybe sell some comics. I don't know, whatever I have to do to get there. Of course, we have to take Detective Jim, one of my moderators, because he's never left the continental United States except to go to the Caribbean. I think he said he went to the Bahamas, which is, of course, where Ian Fleming wrote his Bond novels, and his GoldenEye retreat is there. But that doesn't count. Because Detective Jim, we're going to make Detective Jim get his passport. My passport expires in September, so we're going to have a race. We got 2 months or 2.5 months. Detective Jim's got to get on it. He better have his passport before I renew mine. That's all I'm saying. It'll be great, and we'll do a bunch of live Robservations from London, various pubs. So that's the plan. But I think it'd be cool. So I don't know how it's all going to work out, but you know what? You float these things out there, and you kind of then have to live up to them, and you just got to do that. You got to like make it happen. So I'm going to do that. Now this one, another letter from Dean Mikatich. I think I said it right. No, it's Mikatich. I said it wrong. It's Dean Mikadich. Um, so Dean is back with another letter. I mean, I love you guys firing off multiple letters. Hi, Rob. You and the other Post-Geek Singularity members are most likely starting to get a little sick of me. What can I say? Your channel has hit an accord with me, and I aspire to and inspire me to write in. We talked about color washing of beloved characters, social justice warriors within our films, and the way our franchises are being treated. But I have noticed something that we're not really talking about. Has Hollywood run out of ideas and not willing to take chances, especially with big budget summer blockbusters? I ask this as I'm seeing more and more sequels to past hits, or the summer blockbuster schedule is being filled with superhero films, with Marvel kicking off the season and closing it out. The other thing I've noticed is that remakes of classic films seem to come out more and more often, with Disney being a prime example. There seems to be less and less original ideas that come out during this time, though you do get odd gems like The Martian, Atomic Blonde, or John Wick, which, funnily enough, has spawned its own sequels. Not that I'm complaining. Those sequels have been enjoyable, and you can never get enough of Keanu. I look at Disney and see its rich history of classic animated films from Snow White all the way to The Princess and the Frog. During this time, they also released a large number of original classic live-action films. But in recent years, Disney has stopped releasing these and hand-drawn animations. They've now started to doing animation in the CG style of Pixar, but not making as many films as they did before. I should point out at this point that the look of classic 2D animations can still be achieved cheaper and quicker than hand-drawn by using a computer, but Disney does not appear to want to do this. Since Disney has stopped making stories based on classic fairy tales and animation, they seem to be remaking all these classic animated films into live action, and no new stories seem to be coming from the company. We already had Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, The Jungle Book, Dumbo, and Aladdin, and Lady and the Tramp and Little Mermaid are going into production. My daughter even told me that Lilo and Stitch is going to be made into a live-action film. As I said, there does not seem to be any new stories coming out of Disney, if you exclude Marvel, Lucasfilm, and Pixar. Disney is not the only company that seems to be relying on their past successes, with the other studios putting out remakes of classic films that no one asked for in the near future, such as Scarface, Videodrome, Nosferatu, Charlie's Angels, What Men Want, and many more. In the last 20 years, these remakes have not come close to the original films and just seem a copy. And past change few story elements, with the visuals looking better as technology improved, but it makes these remakes just plain bad. Now, that's not to say that all remakes are as bad. That's not to say all remakes are bad, as some are actually very good. John Carpenter's 1982 classic The Thing comes to mind, which was a remake of the 1951 film The Thing from Another World. While the basic story is the same, an alien found in the ice of the North Pole, which goes on to kill the expedition. They're both very different films. The 51 film has a story of scientists trying to communicate with the alien, while the 82 film is straight-out horror. Sequels don't have to be a bad thing either. There's been some very good ones. I noticed the good sequels tend to change up the story. With T2, the villain has now become the hero. U.S. Marshals switching the story from the fugitive to the Marshals. Die Hard with a Vengeance was based on a script that was not written as a Die Hard film called Simon Says, which was meant to be a Brandon Lee project. Funny enough, Warner Brothers had brought the script to be used as a Lethal Weapon film before Fox picked it up. You have stated many times that Star Trek and Star Wars have a rich library of stories with their novels, yet CBS and Lucasfilm won't look at them. And the same with the novels. There are so many out there that are not connected to a franchise that are just screaming to be made into films, yet no studio will take the chance on them, as there's no guarantee that the film will be profitable. We talked about how films like Blazing Saddles would not be made today, as it is not in line with political correctness. But with Hollywood not willing to take a chance on non-remakes or non-sequels, would a film like The Matrix be made today? I hate to say it, but I think the answer is looking like no. They would consider it to be too much of a gamble. As long as Hollywood continues this trend, it's likely that they will end up killing off the big budget summer blockbuster as audiences start to look for something new and different. At least for the moment, the TV studios, along with Netflix and Amazon, are willing to take a chance. I'd love to hear your thoughts and the thoughts of the Post-Geek Singularity on this. Keep up the great work. Regards, Dean. Well, listen, Dean, there was an article, Scott Mendelson in Forbes wrote an article about how many of the films this summer have been underperforming. Even Toy Story 4, with an opening of $120 million, which was the biggest opening for the franchise, was seen as opening somewhat soft. But other things like Godzilla King of the Monsters or Men in Black International have been seen as being disappointments. And people are wondering, well, what's going on? And I think, look, all of the things that you're talking about are absolutely true. But remember, like John Carpenter's The Thing famously didn't make any money when it came out. It was considered a failure. I wrote an essay on the box office of the summer of 1982 that's in the book, The Cyberpunk Nexus, which is a book, it's a series of essays exploring the Blade Runner universe, which I highly recommend. It's available on Amazon. But I wrote an article about how movies did in the summer of 1982. And when you had a summer of Poltergeist and E.T. and Star Trek II and a number of other films, the dour nature of movies like Blade Runner and The Thing were not really what audiences were interested in that summer, unfortunately. And so they didn't show up at the box office. Both films became minor hits on home video. But still, they both lost money. I think when it comes to studio filmmaking, we live in a world now that's changed. Movies are very, very, when Terminator, you mentioned Terminator 2. When Terminator 2 came out, it had a very rushed production schedule, and it was the first movie, at least that I remember, but I think it was the first movie that was actually budgeted at $100 million. Obviously, creating the T-1000 was something that had never been done before. Cameron was building on visual effects work that he had pioneered with ILM and The Abyss, sort of the pseudopod sequence and what they were able to do. And so the T-1000 was based on that new effects technology. So they spent $100 million. That was really the first $100 million movie. But what's happened now is with, well, the studios, there's less and less studios. And I think now movie going, unfortunately, has become a spectacle-driven business, especially studio filmmaking. It's all about the spectacle. So the studios now are expecting to spend huge money both on the production of these movies and on the marketing of these films, because that's what audiences are going to the multiplexes to see. The sort of mid-level, I mean, remember a movie like The Matrix only cost, well, I say only, but 20 years ago, it only cost $65 million. Now, to give you an example, Deadpool, the first Deadpool, cost about that as well. And which film, I mean, Deadpool has a lot of effects in it, but which film had more groundbreaking effects? I mean, The Matrix would probably cost twice that if it was made today for the first time. And it's unfortunate that with movies this expensive, you're going to see less and less films that are original, because who can roll the dice? How do you justify when a studio is borrowing money from a bank and they don't, contrary to popular belief, studios are not sitting on $1 billion in liquid cash that they can just go make movies with. They have to borrow money. And when you're borrowing money, you have to hedge your bets. You have to do something that's going to make sure that you get a return so the bank can be paid back. Because if the bank isn't paid back, if a movie fails, then another movie has to cover the loss. And you get into a deep, deep, deep hole very, very quickly. So studios now are trying to make tentpole properties that have big returns very quickly, based on not just in terms of how they're produced, but movies are not playing in theaters for 6 months at a time. They're making all their money back in the first few weeks, and you hope to have a smash hit. You hope to get, every time the studios have seen things like the Fast and the Furious films have been on an upward trajectory to the point where they're expected to gross $1 billion. Jurassic World, $1.5 billion. So Fallen Kingdom, they rushed that into production. Got to get another Jurassic Park movie out because they're going to make $1 billion, and that's going to get money back for the studios. And that's what everybody's shooting for. Everyone looks at what Marvel's doing. Captain Marvel makes $1 billion. Endgame makes $2.5 billion. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, while a Sony movie is still perceived as being a Marvel film, it's making money hand over fist. All the studios want that. And unfortunately, I mean, I grew up, the movies I loved, even the Die Hards and even the Hunt for Red Octobers, which, let's face it, The Martian was a literary adaptation. So it was coming off, so there's less risk. And it was a pretty high concept story. Man is marooned on Mars. Inherently, that's always an interesting tale. You have a star-studded cast, you have a star-studded director who wanted to make that movie. So they were able to mitigate their risk across many different platforms or many different concerns that the studio would have. So The Martian becomes a very bankable project. So that's why it gets made. But, very few books reach even that level today. What bestsellers? I mean, that's why Stephen King is once again hot. It, a book that came out 33 years ago, it became one of the most successful horror films ever made, and it wasn't that expensive. So then you see It Part 2 going right into production. They want to get that $500 million for a movie that doesn't cost much. But again, a Stephen King literary adaptation. Now we're going to get CBS All Access doing The Stand. The Stand was already remade or already done as a miniseries in the 90s, which I have a great big love for The Stand miniseries, despite the fact that it was budgetarily challenged and some of the casting is goofy. I love it. Good on you, Mick Garris. And I told you I loved it not just a few weeks back. But they want to mitigate their risk, and we're going to get less and less original things because the studios, especially the people that are working at the studios, they don't want to lose their jobs. So they're trying to mitigate their risk as much as they can. But I also think we need people that work at the studios that know things, that know, like, look, if somebody came to me tomorrow, I'll be arrogant. I'll say this right now. If somebody came to me tomorrow and said, Rob, we're going to hire you at Warner Brothers, or we're going to hire you at Sony, and we're going to hire you at Paramount, and you get a war chest of $500 million to make however many movies you want, I'll give you a hit every single time. Every single time, even if I only had $50 million to spend on the movie and another $50 million to spend on marketing. The problem is, I don't think there's anybody anymore that even knows. They're reading spreadsheets. There's nobody that even goes in and says, like, even the producers like Scott Rudin, who is known for his literary adaptations. He's got impeccable taste. If you look into his past, just go to Scott Rudin's IMDb and look at the things that he's produced. There's a movie, an adaptation of The Goldfinch coming out. Now, I love Donna Tartt. One of my favorite books I've ever read in my entire life is her first novel, The Secret History. Why that hasn't been made, I don't know. I don't know who'd go see it now, quite frankly. But it should be made, especially if it was made for not a lot of money. I do love it when a book like Gone Girl, that I loved, I call it a one-sitter, because you read that book in one sitting, and you truly do. And David Fincher comes on board, makes a phenomenal adaptation out of it. I liked it better than his adaptation of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which is based on another great literary bestseller, but I like the Swedish version better. It's rough out there. It's rough out there. The expectations have become so skewed. It used to be enough that you could get a base hit, or at least get to second base, and that was enough. That was enough. If you had, imagine if you had 10 base hits a year for a studio instead of 2 or 3, if you're lucky, but maybe even one grand slam, $1 billion grosser. 10 years ago, $1 billion grosser, Star Wars movies would make 300 and 400 million. And that was huge. Now we're talking about, The Last Jedi was a disappointment because it only made 1.3 billion. I mean, our world is skewed. We're in a skewed world. It's crazy. And I think, you're right. We're getting just as much. Stranger Things 3 dropped yesterday. There's people just as excited about Stranger Things 3 dropping. I know I'm excited about Stranger Things 3. I've watched the first 2 episodes. I won't say anything. I tweeted about it already, but for me, it's been sort of hit and miss, but we'll see where it goes. But, people are getting just as excited about the Deadwood movie on HBO. I mean, people love that show. They dropped the Deadwood movie. Before they would have put that out in a theater. But who's going to go see a Deadwood movie in the theater now? And we're getting very, very satisfying entertainments provided by Amazon, provided by Hulu, provided by Netflix. And the world is just a different place. And going out to the movies has now become the equivalent of going to an amusement park. You're going to have an experience as much as you are seeing a film. People want to go be a part of it. Opening weekend has become a thing. Got to go opening weekend to be a part of the conversation. Don't have it spoiled for you. So movie going has changed. And when you do have movies like Booksmart that are coming out, or Late Night, which I talked about before, that was a big purchase at Sundance. On paper, everyone looks at Late Night and thought, ooh, this did well at Sundance, and we're going to acquire it for a lot of money as far as an independent film goes. And it looked like a slam dunk. The problem is, who's going to go? The Late Night was not an experience. And that's what movie going has become. It's become not just movies, but it's become an overall experience. You need to provide somebody the end all be all of movie going experiences now if you're a studio. And if you don't, I mean, what's really funny about that is I think if studios did take more, if you had people that were working at the studios that knew, that were readers themselves, that really kept up on pop culture and knew, when I say kept up on pop culture, I'm talking comics. I'm talking about newspaper articles that have been turned into movies. I'm talking about novels. I mean, there's a lot to keep up with. But what we have now is we have a corporate culture that everyone's terrified of losing money, and everything's being made. It's spreadsheet filmmaking. How do we mitigate our risks? And they even meddle with the filmmakers because it's so risky these days. And it's hard out there. It's hard out there, everyone. It's tough. And unfortunately, we're going to be getting that spectacle filmmaking for a while. I mean, look, as much as people talk about Booksmart, I mean, even a few years ago when Lady Bird came out, Lady Bird did much better at the box office than Booksmart did, and you're still dealing with the story, sort of a coming of age story of a girl like with Lady Bird with Saoirse Ronan. That movie made a lot more money. And Booksmart, by all accounts, I have not seen it. Even John Campea thought it was his favorite movie of the year. Struggling at the box office. I think because people look at Booksmart and they're like, oh, I can see that on streaming. And Always Be My Maybe, the Netflix movie, has been doing quite well. People have been talking about it because it was streaming. Even the film that I'm finishing up, Tango Shalom, I would love for people to see it in a movie theater. I would, but I operate under no illusions. Hopefully it's a festival darling, and I would love to see it get picked up by a streamer like a Netflix or hopefully an Amazon to sort of be paired with The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. But I just don't see that, as much as I adore Tango Shalom, who's going to spend $30 million marketing the film the way it needs to be marketed to get audiences en masse into the theater. It's just a different world. It's a different world, people. It's a different world. I don't necessarily think it's a bad world. It's just different. It's part of the ongoing evolution of film going and movie making. Stubble McShave is here. Stubble McShave says The Living Daylights was the last Cold War Bond film. You know, it really was. That's a very astute observation, Stubble. It really was. I mean, you could say GoldenEye, because it was dealing with the remnants of the Soviet Union, was also a Cold War Bond film in a way. There's been elements, but the Cold War is obviously over, although is it? I mean, we're back. I mean, Russia's back on the world stage as a big player. North Korea's a problem. China. You know, it's really interesting. My girlfriend Elizabeth and I went back, and she had never seen The Manchurian Candidate from 1962, which is one of my favorite films of all time, really. And that movie is about the Chinese and the Russians teaming up to go after America. And you're like, yeah, nothing's changed, in almost 60 years, nothing's changed. But I missed the days of the Cold War, because that's where the Bond franchise kind of came out of. You had Smersh even before Spectre, From Russia with Love, the first, well, actually I was going to say the first Bond sequel, but it's not really the Bond it's a franchise. I wouldn't call them sequels because they're adaptations of novels. I mean, I don't know, maybe they were considered sequels, but you're right. I love that The Living Daylights, and the fact that it was a Cold War movie still, was a big part of it. And the fact that the Russians were still involved in Afghanistan. It's really interesting. There's a lot of historical stuff going on in Living Daylights. And I kind of miss that from our Bond movies. I think that's part of the reason Bond has looked for more relevance. I mean, Casino Royale was interesting because it was all about how is terrorism being financed. And it's interesting when the terrorists are the most dangerous people on earth, but then they're kind of I do like the rogue megalomaniac like Stromberg and Drax from the mid 70s, Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker they were great villains, and they did not have any state affiliation. We could get back to that. Maybe Rami Malek is like that in Bond 25. It'll be interesting to see. It's rumored that it's all about genetic engineering and bioweapons, and I say bring it on, because look, anything to do with virulent, I mean, Will Yang can speak to this, but I love my plague and disease movies. Anything with any kind of disease vectoring, bring it on. I love it. That's why Stephen King's The Stand is one of my favorite books of all time, because it's about a great pandemic that wipes out most of the world's population. If you guys haven't seen Steven Soderbergh's Contagion, well, that movie's a hoot. It's about a super flu. Check it out. It's great. Wade O'Neill says, I hope they get Iron Maiden to do an opening Bond credits song. I doubt that will happen, but that would be cool. I'm very curious to hear who's going to do the Bond opening theme song this time. I was not a fan of Spectre, the last Bond theme song. I thought it was kind of milquetoast, and it did set the tone for the rest of the film. However, Cardinal Sin says, I wish Idris Elba would play Bond. It's our loss. I love Idris Elba. I loved him since he played Stringer Bell in, of course, The Wire. And like many, I had no idea Idris Elba was British. No clue. His British accent was pretty dead on in that. But I think the problem with Idris Elba playing Bond is he's just too old. I think he's pushing 50, I think. And they've got to really hire a Bond in his mid-30s that can do, if they're going to keep the Bond franchise going, and they do a movie every 2 years, which is what they should do. I would love to see like a Richard Madden in the role. If you guys haven't seen the 6-episode Bodyguard, it's not The Bodyguard, just Bodyguard, the BBC series. It's on Netflix. It's terrific. And after watching that, I was like, Richard Madden could play Bond. He absolutely could play Bond. I believe that. I would love that. But Idris Elba is great. It's really interesting. One of the things that kind of resulted as of yesterday is my chat about The Little Mermaid. And I've watched a lot of videos. Actually, I just watched one before this chat, and then I watched one earlier today when they were talking about swapping the race of characters. And two black pundits made the point that rather than swap characters, what they're more interested in seeing is original characters that are black in the beginning. And they both pointed out that having the race of a character swapped out feels like getting hand-me-down. One of the pundits I watch said it was like when you're a black kid and you have to wear your father's suit or your father's shoes. Yeah, they're nice, I guess, but what you want is something of your own. And I think if Idris Elba were to play Bond, I think Idris Elba's a badass. That's why I can't wait to see Hobbs and Shaw for no other reason than to watch Idris Elba kick ass. But it's interesting. I mean, I'd like to see him have his own franchise where he originates a character that's his, as opposed to playing a character that would never be his, and his race would always be a talking point, even if the movie was the greatest movie in the world. It's very interesting having these chats, just being aware of these questions. And I'm constantly, no matter what I talk about, I'm never done with these ideas when I just keep watching and keep hearing what people say. And I really appreciate the ongoing dialogue that we seem to be generating here at the Post-Geek Singularity, both in the comment section of this live stream, the comment section of the chats, and then also the letters we're getting. So I don't know. I mean, Idris Elba could have been a great Bond. But again, I think he's too old now, and it might have been our loss. But I think Idris Elba should be given a new franchise that's uniquely his, the same way that the John Wick franchise is Keanu Reeves. I mean, I really like it when you can create a franchise around an actor, male or female, where they keep getting to come back and we get to see them play the role over and over and over again. I dearly adore when that happens. So hopefully we will see more of that in the future. But who knows? But who knows? Evan Newman says, do you think MGM will be forced to retitle Octopussy, since some might find it to be an unwoke title? YouTube wouldn't even let me write the title. Really? Octopussy is the character's name. I don't know. I think all of Look, this is a ridiculous time. You know, I think how woke is too woke. I don't know. I think that it's interesting. I don't ever want to be woke to the point that I don't admire a beautiful woman. You know, I don't want to get to that point. And it's pretty ridiculous when you can't write the title of 1983's Octopussy out on YouTube. They won't let you because it's somewhat offensive to somebody. Well, it's Maud Adams' character's name in the film. So, and by the way, I'm sure we're not far away from somebody saying that the entire Bond franchise is misogynistic and it's very Inception. So we're going to have to get rid of it all. It's strange, people. We live in weird, weird, weird times. Tommy Martinson says, I want the next Bond film to be set in the 60s. You know, I got to tell you, there are two films that I loved. One was The Man from U.N.C.L.E. with Henry Cavill and as Napoleon Solo. And then, of course, X-Men First Class. And both of those films were set in the 60s. And I love that milieu. I thought it worked really, really, really great. And Armie Hammer playing, of course, Ilya Kuryakin. I love that. I thought I love The Man from U.N.C.L.E. It didn't make any money, so they're not going to make another one, but I loved it. And I loved, if you get the Blu-ray, there's great behind the scenes on the making of the film. Everybody looked like they were having a really good time. I think setting a movie in the 60s would be great. I would love to see a Bond film set in the 60s again. I don't know if they could do it correctly, but it's interesting. And I love the idea. Willow Yang is here. Willow Yang says, watching, oh, you're in for a treat. Watching Turnabout Intruder tonight, the last episode of the original series. I've been told that I need to see The Next Generation Up Next, DS9, and the animated series. Well, the animated series you should watch next because it came, the original series was from 66 to 69. The animated series was from 1973 to 74. Star Trek The Next Generation was 1987 to 1994. And then Deep Space Nine was 1993 to 2000, I think. Maybe 99, 2000. But yeah, I mean, I think those are what you do need to see. There's only 22 episodes of the animated series, and they're basically only 22 minutes long. But it would be interesting. I think you only really need to review a couple of them. Like I would, of course, review Yesteryear, Beyond the Furthest Star. Someone said One of Our Planets is Missing. The Magics of Megas 2, Jihad, Time Trap. I quite enjoy the original series. I mean, the animated series. But then you have to do TNG and DS9. But, you should consult me because you don't need to watch every episode of The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine because there's 172 episodes of Deep Space Nine and 178 episodes of TNG. If you include the All Good Things and Encounter at Farpoint as the two parts they were later split into. So yeah. But yes, there you go. And who doesn't want to continue to hear Willow Yang review Star Trek episodes? I really want to see that. Jonathan Peck is here. Jonathan Peck says, funny enough, yesterday I saw Independence Day. It's hard to believe that a movie wouldn't be a risk back in 96, considering marketing and budget. It pulled it off very well. The special effects still hold up. Jonathan, you are correct. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember, but one of the most exciting marketing campaigns for a summer blockbuster that I can remember was Independence Day. The marketing for that film was brilliant. Go back and watch the trailers. They did a phenomenal job. And that movie, by the way, from Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich, was made for not a lot of money. Their effects companies, Centropolis, they did a lot of those effects in-house. And it was a brilliantly made. Look at the cast. I mean, Will Smith was not the Will Smith of today. And Jeff Goldblum certainly hadn't gone through the Goldblum Renaissance. And it really has an eclectic cast. But I mean, who would have thought Judd Hirsch was going to ever be in a summer blockbuster? Or Harvey Fierstein. Pretty crazy. But I think Independence Day holds up. I think it's a hell of a lot of fun. It's a really satisfying movie. It's a throwback to the disaster films of the 70s. I love Independence Day. I have great big love for it. As goofy as it may be, even using an Apple computer at the end. I mean, they just reverse engineer the signal. So the aliens had to figure out how to get into our primitive technology. So why couldn't we use our primitive technology to get into the alien back doors that they had to have built to get into our technology in the first place? I dig it, man. I'm in. I dig Independence Day. I'm glad you watch it. I too think that it holds up. I love Independence Day. Wade O'Neill says they can't rename her Octomom because it's taken. Nope, they cannot. They cannot rename her Octomom. Suthia says, hey, Mr. B, is James Bond the moniker, or does every spy get the last name Bond with different first names? I wonder if they're spies named Covalent and Ionic. Here's the thing. That's funny, actually. That is a theory that has been put forward because the James Bond continuity doesn't make much sense, and especially when you go back and you reboot Bond with Daniel Craig. It's funny, as a kid, I guess because the Bond franchise, I would always be seeing them out of order. I always thought that each Bond film kind of was its own internal continuity. I didn't see them as following, other than Diamonds Are Forever. The opening of Diamonds Are Forever definitely follows right behind On Her Majesty's Secret Service, because Bond is on the hunt for Blofeld, who has killed his wife at the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And there's different nods to things, like in, of course, the beginning of For Your Eyes Only, they couldn't use Blofeld because of Kevin McClory, but we see a character they don't name as Blofeld who's clearly Blofeld. And there's the reference to Teresa Bond back to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But the Bond continuity has never really bothered me, but there's been this idea put forward, and somebody even, it's funny, like, here's the thing, I don't think this is true. I'm going to say this flat out. James Bond is the name of the character. James Bond was in the British military. I understand that. I get that. But within the continuity of the James Bond movies, the Sean Connery iteration of Bond could have died in the early 70s. And then the Bond character, it just assumed for a minute that the 00 status would also come with a name. I mean, it's kind of cool. So any 007 is named James Bond. 006 would be named Alex Trevelyan, I guess. I don't know. How could it work? But that's just a fan theory that's come up to explain 50 some odd years of continuity. It's not real. The character of James Bond is indeed named James Bond, but I think it's pretty cool that to explain the different continuities that you could say, that's because everyone's into canon and continuity, especially for imagination connoisseurs. We love that kind of thing. And while it's an interesting way to go, it doesn't necessarily make it's not real necessarily, especially if you're a fan of the Ian Fleming novels. But yeah. Just Plain Steve says, do you still actively read comics, and do you have any recommendations? Just Plain Steve, no, I do not actively read comics as they are coming out. However, I do pick up graphic novels and series collections when they come. Like, for instance, I didn't read Dark Knight Metal, but I went and bought all the books when they came out, and it was a hoot. And I do collect omnibuses after the fact. Like, I'll give you an example. I never read Ed Brubaker's run on Captain America. And I had bought, I want to say two of the Captain America omnibuses. And it had almost been, what, a decade since that run had come out. I sat down one Sunday and read 2 omnibuses of Brubaker's Captain America run. Then I later picked up a third and read that. And so I now wait to pick up series later. And so I'm always behind, way behind. Like, I just got recently, I got the second book of Paper Girls, which is a great, great series. But like the Image equivalent, I think it's Image, right? Paper Girls is Image. I just caught up. So I don't read, and I would highly recommend that series. I'm like looking, what did I buy? You know what I haven't bought? Is here, I'll show you what I've shown this before. Jason Lutz, although it's dirty. Jason Lutz Berlin is something I'm getting through that I've showed a couple of times. Really like this, and it's something new that I had never even heard of. But yeah, so as far as superhero comics, there's some like Identity Crisis X recent thing, a DC series, Heroes in Trouble or Heroes in Crisis, whatever that is. I got to read that because I love all the big DC crossovers. I got to catch up with X-Men. But yeah, so that's where I'm at with comics. Lean Warrior Lifestyle says, hello, Rob, huge fan. Well, thank you. Did you enjoy Dalton as Bond? Well, Lean Warrior Lifestyle, I did. I enjoyed Dalton as Bond a great deal. As we were talking about earlier in this chat, I really love Living Daylights. I even thought he was really good in License to Kill. I just thought that License to Kill, the storyline was a little goofy, and Bond going after a drug lord. Look, I get it. I mean, what he did to Felix Leiter's wife and Felix Leiter, I get why he did it. He made it personal. I understand. I just thought we had been getting a lot of drug lord storylines, and it was not what I expected from a Bond film. But a lot of people do like License to Kill. I am not one of them. I thought for the Bond franchise, it didn't do a lot of globetrotting. It looked like it was made cheaply. I didn't like Michael Kamen's score. I did kind of like the original title song. I thought it was smoky and sultry and cool, but it wasn't as good as I wanted. The movie wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. I wanted more from it, and it's unfortunate that Dalton didn't get to do any more Bond films because of the Kevin McClory, the ongoing legal shenanigans. Stubble McShave says, in 93, 94, they worked on TNG, DS9, Generations, and were writing the first season of Voyager. That is absolutely true, Stubble. They were busy people. 94, I've always thought of the year 1994 as the zenith of modern Trek. I mean, Generations was on the cover of Time magazine. Of course, All Good Things, the show went out with a huge bang with All Good Things. Next Generation did, and they had Generations out in theaters 6 months later. I mean, it was pretty great. Pretty great. So Suthius says, whenever I'm driving and I see cloud lightning lighting up the distant night sky, I think of the tripods from the War of the Worlds remake. Terrifying. Well, as Suthius points out, if any of you, the original War of the Worlds from 1953, the Byron Haskin directed Paramount release of War of the Worlds, is when I was 5 years old. It was my first favorite movie. And they're doing two remakes. I think it's the BBC is remaking it again. It's a modern day retelling. The original story takes place in Victorian England, the original H.G. Wells story. No one would have believed. Anyway, I really liked the Steven Spielberg War of the Worlds remake. I especially loved the first 20 minutes are absolutely terrifying. As a matter of fact, when I get off this chat, you've just made me, I'm going to go watch the first 20 minutes, because the first 20 minutes, the reveal of the aliens is so good. The rest of the movie, not so much, but the first half of War of the Worlds, there's so much to love in that movie. It just doesn't go very far, but I love it. But I'm right there with you, Suthius. I think that's pretty funny. As well, you should think about the tripods from War of the Worlds, because the way that they were realized, the way they moved, the sounds they made, I loved everything about the way the aliens were depicted in Spielberg's remake of War of the Worlds. And I love Tom Cruise in it, and I love Dakota Fanning in it. She was great. Terrific. Koba says, is Felix Leiter a code word name as well? He's had more actors than Bond. Could very well be. Could very well be. But you point out something great. I love Jeffrey Wright as Felix Leiter. I love how he calls everybody in the intelligence community brother, which is, I guess, what they do. I think it's great that they're bringing him back for Bond 25. I love him. So good. Jonathan Peck says, don't forget about Randy Quaid and the late great Robert Loggia in ID4, and Quaid's final lines are a fist-pumping moment. Jonathan Peck, you are absolutely correct about that. One of the great things, look, I love the cast of Independence Day uniformly across the board. There's not a misstep in it. And it's a hoot. And it's funny because it's kind of cornball, but the cast, everything about it, but they tread that line. I mean, they do a great job of threading that needle between awesomeness and complete cornball, hackneyed ridiculousness. I don't think they succeeded nearly as well in their follow-up with Godzilla, but Independence Day. I mean, Robert Loggia. I love Robert Loggia. The late great Robert Loggia is so great. I miss him already. Team Nerd says comic sug, cosmic Ghost Rider, kill baby Thanos. Comic suggestion. You shortened it to sug. Okay. Comic suggestion, cosmic Ghost Rider, kill baby Thanos. I have heard this. I will read that just because you suggested it. Suthia says Chinese egg rolls or Vietnamese egg rolls, folks. Well, that's tough. That's a tough one. Only because I've been eating Chinese egg rolls my whole life. I got to go with the Chinese egg rolls. I've eaten Vietnamese egg rolls and they are tasty. But again, egg rolls are a high art. And you should never take a good egg roll for granted. Never. So, Suthius, I'm going to fall on the side of the Chinese egg roll, but I do not want to discount our Vietnamese brothers and sisters. They have pretty great egg rolls too. Lean Warrior Lifestyle says, I don't know why I didn't like his movies as a kid, maybe due to enjoying more as Bond. I've become a huge Dalton fan since. Will rewatch Daylights. I have to say, it's very interesting. So the first James Bond movie I ever saw in the theater was Spy Who Loved Me, which was a return to the epic Bonds because Live and Let Die and Man with the Golden Gun were they were not widescreen movies. So Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger were what are called flat. I want to say they're 1:6:6. They're aspect ratio. So for every 1 unit tall they're 1:6:6 units wide. So it's just a little bit bigger than a square. And 1:6:6 was a favorite of the Brits. And we had the Academy ratio, which is 1:3:3:1, which is basically a square. It's like TV. But for Thunderball, which was, I want to say 65, Thunderball was 65, I think. They went to the widescreen format, basically Panavision 235 or 239, but 235:1. So the widescreen epic Bonds were Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and Diamonds Are Forever. And then in a cost-cutting measure, I think it was cost-cutting, both Live and Let Die and Man with the Golden Gun went back to the 1:6:6. They might be 1:8:5. I'm not totally sure, but they were no longer the epic aspect ratio. Were no longer widescreen. And then they changed over with Spy Who Loved Me. They went back to the widescreen format for Bond. So there's really 5 Bond films that aren't widescreen, and the rest are widescreen. But so when I was a kid, I loved Roger Moore. I probably think that he seemed more debonair. I think he was more relatable, but I liked, as I got older and really started to appreciate the Bond franchise, I liked Connery a lot more because he was more realistic. Roger Moore never got his suits dirty, but Connery would get beat up. He was rough and tumble, and there was just something about him. He was more of a man's man and certainly more misogynistic. Not that that's necessarily a good thing, but he was ruthless. Connery's Bond was ruthless. Roger Moore was a little bit more. He didn't necessarily always have to. He got in fights, but I just didn't believe them as much as I believed Connery. I believed Connery as James Bond more. And because his early movies were more down to earth and what was going on. I mean, I love the fact that Sean Connery takes on Auric Goldfinger on the golf course. So, yeah. But I think Bond was more kid friendly. Sean Connery wasn't, maybe. I don't know. And because the Roger Moore films became a little bit more unrealistic, I think, and they were, I don't know, it's interesting. I think as a kid, I probably liked Roger Moore more, but as I got older, I came to, with the advent of home video, I was always a Bond fan growing up, but you couldn't, you'd see Bond films if they came out in the theater, and there was only 2 Bond movies that came out before I had my VCR, which was Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. And by 81's For Your Eyes Only, I already had a VCR. So I had gone back and they had been releasing the Bond films. And I became a student of the Bond franchise when I was 13. And as I started watching commercial-free James Bond movies, it quickly became apparent to me that I was a Connery fan. So that's how that worked and developed. And going back and watching Dr. No, and specifically from Russia with Love. From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and Thunderball were, to me, some of my favorite Bonds when I started really studying the Bond franchise as a 13-year-old, just because they seemed more mature. Tommy Martinson asks, thoughts on Mars Attacks? Flawed, but I love it. To me, Mars Attacks is very Tim Burton. Of course, I had the trading cards when I was little. And for those of you who don't know, Mars Attacks began as a trading card series. And the trading card series was so much fun because it was so hideously over the top violent. The aliens were they just destroyed everything. They vaporized people. And if you're a kid, they're like a punk rock, like a great punk record to drive your parents crazy. Like EC Comics or something. But the Mars Attacks cards were they were very funny because how over the top violent they were. And I thought the movie, to me, it's very hit and miss. I mean, it's fun. It's deeply flawed. I think it's deeply flawed, but because it's completely over the top and goofy, and the aliens are always going ack, ack, ack. I couldn't get into it. I'm like, it started out, the camp level was up to 10. And I know that it's such a weird thing for me. And when especially when I'm talking about verisimilitude and stuff, I appreciate what Mars Attacks did. I never loved it. To me, it was just camp. I have a hard time dealing with camp unless it's presented in a very specific sort of a way. And I don't love Mars Attacks. I don't own Mars Attacks. Although Hot Toys did make some cool Mars Attacks figures. Anyway, yeah, I like the alien designs, but they're goofy. But I definitely think it's probably a love of many people's. I think a lot of people do like Mars Attacks. Ken Dixon says, just saw the new Stan Lee Hot Toy. Will you get it? Ken is talking about Hot Toys is making a convention exclusive version of Stan Lee from Guardians of the Galaxy 2, where he was talking to the Watchers. Hell yes, son. I want that figure so bad. I didn't get the first Hot Toys Stan Lee figure because I'm like, well, it's just a figure of Stan Lee, which would be cool to have a Hot Toy of Stan Lee, I guess. But a Hot Toy of Stan Lee as a character that he portrayed in the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. First of all, I love astronaut suits that are throwbacks to the 50s with the big bubble-headed helmets. I want that figure so much. It's so great. His sunglasses that he's wearing inside, it's great. That's a great figure. They just announced it was coming out along with the Scarlet Spider. I have not seen it up for pre-order on the Sideshow website, but I know it's going to be a convention exclusive. I hope they announce that they're going to sell it. Maybe you can only get it at Comic-Con. I don't know. I'm sure it's going to sell out immediately and the price will jump on the secondary market. But buddy, I want one. It's very, very cool. Kartik Prasad says, Roger Moore is still my favorite Bond. I think I think the James Bond franchise is a lot like Star Trek or Star Wars or any franchise. When you first see the Bond franchise, it's hugely impressionable. And if you're the kind of person that is open to loving Bond, like, I don't know, as many of you know, or maybe you don't know, I'm involved with the movie Trivia Schmodown, and I was the first Inner Geek champion. Now, I could never win the Inner Geek champion because everyone's so serious about it. But back then, that was what I knew off the top of my head. I didn't have to study. Now you have to study if you want to win. But the James Bond films were an Inner Geek question for a long time, and everybody protested. I'm a middle-aged guy with one foot in the grave, so I'm the oldest competing member of the Schmodown. I don't think there's anyone nearly as old as me. So I welcomed the Bond franchise with open arms, but a lot of people said that's not a geeky franchise, and I'm like, the Bond franchise and the Planet of the Apes franchise are to my mind, are my ground zero geek franchises. Star Trek didn't have a film franchise, and it was only 79 episodes of the original series. Star Wars didn't exist. So to me, growing up, Bond and Planet of the Apes were it. And it's very funny that nowadays, kids different. I mean, when you were a kid growing up, watching James Bond movies on the ABC Sunday night movie was a huge deal. So they were special, and when they were on television, it was great. And remember, I was 13 before I was able to get a VCR in 1980, and I was one of the first people I know to have one. And then the Bond films were soon released. They've been mainstays of home video formats ever since. So I've always thought of the Bond franchise as being one of the great film franchises. And I think your favorite Bond, it really comes down to who did you see first as Bond, where you saw Bond, how you saw Bond, and did you see Bond in the theater? And I think now what's very funny about James Bond is it used to be in the 60s, it set trends. In the 70s, Bond chased trends. In the 80s, it was it became another action franchise as it did in the 90s. And then once again, it was chasing trends. It was trying to live up to the Bourne movies, and Bond has tried to maintain or hold on to its relevance. And while Spectre and the Daniel Craig Bonds have all, even Quantum of Solace, have all done very well at the box office, I don't think people think that the James Bond franchise is a cutting edge franchise. Everybody goes to see Bond because it's been around so long. Everybody likes Bond. But I think Kartik, whoever your favorite Bond is, absolutely is the Bond you grew up with or first experienced. And now what's great about Bond is you've got the Connery era of Bond, which really ended in 71. You've got the Roger Moore era of Bond that went from 73 to 85. You've got the Dalton era of Bond, which was 87 to 89. Then you had Pierce Brosnan, who started in 95. And then Daniel Craig, who started in 2006 and continues on to 2020. So really, I think that that span of time with Daniel Craig will have been James Bond the longest. So it's going to be interesting to see how history looks back at the Bond franchise from this perspective now. Because I mean, think about it: 1962 to 2020. That's a crazy amount of time for a franchise, and pretty amazing. 25 films. I know people are all there's 23 films in the MCU. I know. It's a different time. Crazy. Victory Unlimited show is here. I just watched one of my favorite old espionage war movies, Pimpernel Smith, for free on YouTube. Never seen this. Never seen Pimpernel Smith. I love movies where the lone hero outsmarts the villains in a battle of wits. What are your favorite espionage type movies? That's a good question. I mean, espionage, I mean, I think that like Where Eagles Dare, even though it's a World War II movie, it deals with espionage. I think like Sneakers was an espionage film. I really kind of like that. God, that's a good one. More espionage movies. I really like the TV series Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. The Smiley's People. I like the old miniseries Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Smiley's People. I like the John le Carré stuff like that. I don't, but that's a good question. I have to think about that. By the way, thank you for the ongoing support of the channel. I really appreciate you doing that. You don't have to, and I very much appreciate that you do. And I do love saying Victory Unlimited show, which I got to go listen to your show. And all of you should go listen to the Victory Unlimited show and report back and tell me what you think. And because I need to do that. But yeah, it's espionage. That's interesting. Espionage. Wait a minute. Ken Dixon says the pre-order is up at Sideshow. Oh, dude, I'm pre-ordering that goodness. Yes, sir. That's amazing. Stubble McShave says more unrealistic. Moonraker full of Stubble McShave says more unrealistic. Moonraker is full of verisimilitude. Well, first of all, Stubble, thank you too for supporting the channel. But yes, I know Moonraker is pretty damn silly. But you know what? Moonraker, for as goofy as it gets, I mean, it really does. It really is goofy. Moonraker is really goofy, but there's something about it that I love. A lot of people just can't deal with the tone of Moonraker. And admittedly, the tone of Moonraker is all over the map, dude. And it's hard. It's tough. But there's something about, I love the globe trotting. I love the glass-drawn boat chase in Brazil. I love the visual effects. I love Ken Adams' set designs. I think it's Ken Adams did Moonraker. There's so much about Moonraker that I will love, even though it's a complete shameless remake of Spy Who Loved Me, which was also basically a remake of You Only Live Twice. But I I give Moonraker a pass. It was the second Bond film I saw in the theater, and I did love it. I did love it, even though I don't think it's great. But so Ken Dixon also says, he did say the pre-order is open, so I'm going to get it. Yes, Ken, thank you, by the way, for pointing that one out. Suthia says, have you seen Attack on Titan Season 3 yet? I have not. I've only watched my Blu-rays of the first season, and I've seen the live-action movie. My favorite so far, and oh my goodness, some of the revelations are oh shit moments. Sad, only one season left. Well, that's good. I got to catch up with that. You know, the next anime series I have to catch up with is the remake of Legends of the Galactic Heroes, which I'm scared to watch. I have the first season of that on Blu-ray, but I'm scared to watch it. I've got to catch up. Wade O'Neill says, did you ever see the 2003 horror movie Monster Man, a film about a monster driving a monster truck? The production quality is high, so it must have lost a ton of money, but great entertainment. Wade, Monster Man was directed by Michael Davis, who is a good friend of mine who went on to direct Shoot 'Em Up. And strangely enough, my ex-wife did the key art for the DVD cover for Monster Man. Yes, I've seen it. I quite enjoyed it. I think it's a pretty good film. I think, look, my friend Michael Davis, I actually produced the Blu-ray, came out on Blu-ray, so I did the Blu-ray special features for Shoot 'Em Up. If you haven't seen Clive Owen Shoot 'Em Up, it's a hoot. It was directed by Michael Davis, who directed Monster Man, and it's got a great hour-long documentary, if I do say so myself, that Dave Parker, the director of The Hills Run Red, and I worked on. It's a lot of fun. I have great affection for all of Michael Davis's movies. Michael Davis, the director of Shoot 'Em Up, you might ask yourself, well, what's he been doing for the last 11 years since he directed Shoot 'Em Up? Michael Davis has been doing an insane film about, it's called Nicked, I think. I think it's called Nicked. Nicks? It's a movie. It's a crazy an animated fantasy film about Richard Nixon having to solve the Kennedy assassination. And Michael Davis animated the entire movie by himself. It's insane. I've seen a cut of it. He's been working on it for a very, very, very long time. It's going to be a movie that people are going to talk about. It's a lot of fun. And if you haven't seen Shoot 'Em Up, that movie's a hoot too. So check out Shoot 'Em Up. And if you get the Blu-ray, you can see a documentary that I made. Suthia said, did you hear Netflix is cutting back on characters smoking in their shows? Really? Of all the things to complain about, this is what we come up with? Well, you know, there's always parents. For instance, if you watch Stranger Things Season 3, I was surprised because you see someone smoking in the opening scene of the first episode, and one of the characters is seen smoking because it takes place in the 80s. Smoking doesn't bother me in movies. I understand that people smoking causes cancer and all of that. But I mean, to me, it's never bothered me. As a matter of fact, I love when characters smoke in movies, to be honest. I know smoking's bad for you. So many things are bad for you. You might as well complain when somebody eats a juicy burger in a movie or a lot of red meat. I mean, really, we should all go to plant-based diets so they won't kill us. But anyway, I think it's weird. And Suthia says, you're absolutely right. I think there's better things to complain about than smoking in movies. But I get why. You know, there's a lot of kids out there vaping now, and there's a lot of people smoking a lot because pot's legal. And I get what they're saying. I mean, I do understand where people are coming from. But I do think, yes, why don't we just get rid of everything that's bad for everybody? I mean, why not ban cars? You know how many people die from driving in cars every year? But no, it's kind of silly. Anyway, I want to thank all of you. I'm going to bring this chat, the Robservations live chat number 163, to a close. I want to thank everybody for being here. It's been a great chat. I think this was a fun one today. Didn't get into too much controversy. I got to talk a lot of Bond, which is always a good thing. I want to thank everybody for supporting this channel the way you do. Please go to the website at theburnettwork.net. You can support the channel there. We're doing more stuff via that. I'm deplatforming from Patreon. And I'll be doing a few things. You're going to see an episode of Living the Lucky Tiger Life. I just decided to do a Lucky Tiger, my own Lucky Tiger Robservations thing, since they're generous enough to support the channel. I wanted to just do something more for them. As you saw, I dropped last week the interview with Alan Murphy. This week, I did an interview with James Hills from the mantripping.com website. And James Hills is an interesting cat. James travels around the world and basically goes on man trips. So if you want to go with your buddies and go on man trips, mantripping.com, he goes places, he checks all kinds of things out. Like he's going to get to be at the unveiling of the new Corvette next week or something. And he'll go get to drive one and he's there. So he's traveling all over the place. And he was up in Vancouver a couple weeks ago. And I interviewed him while he was on a cruise ship, a new Norwegian cruise ship that they just brought over and let people on. Now, the sound isn't the best in the world, but I did interview him via Skype. And it's going to be, I was able to get some cool footage from the cruise line company and edit it in. But it's an interview with James Hills from mantripping.com. Check out his website. It's pretty good. And about what it's like to be on, to be a dude and go on cruise ships. Can your buddies go on cruise ships? Like I always thought, I've never been on a cruise, but I always thought of cruise ships as like family friendly or for lovers or something. And I never thought of ever going on a cruise ship with like my buddies, but he makes a pretty convincing case. So I'm going to drop the second episode of Living the Lucky Tiger Life. And it is starring James Hills from mantripping.com. And, I hope to do more of that. Like I really am enjoying, I wanted to do more interviews with people, and I don't know what you guys think. If you want to see me interview like people in the movie business or people just other walks of life, because I like watching Joe Rogan and I like watching Dave Rubin interview people for a long period of time. I think I could be pretty good at interviewing folks. I don't know. What would you guys like to see? Would you like to see more of that? And then, of course, I'm going to be dropping, I don't know if I'm going to be doing it today, but I'm going to do maybe over the weekend. I'm going to do the first Viewer's Choice show that was suggested by a supporter of the Burnettwork.net. And if you support at $3 a month, you can, part of that, you can then give me ideas to do a single show. And I'm going to cover one topic suggested by a viewer, just one topic, and examine that. And I haven't decided whether I'm going to just do those not live, or maybe I will do them live. I don't know. Again, what do you think? I'm trying to figure out these formats. I'm going to expand the channel and start doing single shows during the week. Like they'll be fully articulated on Tuesday, where I'll go into a toy or a model rocket or something. I'll cover something for a short period of time, not like these long chats, but more like bite-sized morsels of Robservations that cover more things, because people are always asking me to talk about toys or this or that. So, yeah. Anyway, that's coming. So I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel. I want to thank my moderators. I want to thank Terry. I want to thank Greg. I want to thank Jim. And I want to thank Mike Bodden for being great moderators and making the Post-Geek Singularity environment here one of the best on YouTube for fans. I'd like it if everybody would hit like on these chats if they like them. If not, you can say dislike too. But the way the YouTube algorithms work now, it's great if you can give me a like and a subscribe. That would be much appreciated. It helps the channel out. And again, with that, I just want to say, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. So all you have to do is listen. And with that, I want to say to all of you to have a better day and enjoy your weekend. I will be here tomorrow and the next day. Thanks a lot.